Betrayal doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waits until you trust the wrong people completely. I discovered my husband and my closest friend together in the one place I thought was safe, my home. The divorce that followed was swift and brutal. Through documents I didn't fully understand, they drained my accounts, claimed the house, and left me with nothing but silence. With no money and nowhere else to go, I returned to the abandoned house where I grew up, expecting only dust and regret. Instead, hidden beneath old floorboards, I found a suitcase with my name written on it. Inside were stacks of cash totaling $70,000, a plane ticket, and a handwritten note that stopped my breath. It promised that this money was only the beginning, and that my real inheritance was still waiting. My name is Naomi Calder, and I am 46 years old. For most of my marriage, I believed trust was something that protected you from the worst parts of life. My husband and I built our routines around that belief: shared finances, shared plans, shared friends. I never checked his phone, never questioned late meetings, never imagined betrayal could exist so close to home. I believed loyalty was mutual simply because I offered it freely. Our home felt secure, familiar, permanent. Looking back, I realize how easily comfort can disguise warning signs. I wasn't naive. I was confident in what I thought we had. That confidence made me blind. I believed marriage meant safety, and safety meant certainty. I had no idea that the foundation I trusted most was already cracking quietly beneath my feet. She had been my closest friend for years, the person I confided in without hesitation. Slowly, I noticed how often she showed up unannounced, how comfortable she seemed in my home. She laughed too easily with him, finished his sentences, shared inside jokes I didn't remember starting. At first, I dismissed the discomfort as insecurity. Friendship, I told myself, should feel easy, but something shifted. She knew his schedule better than I did. She defended him when we argued. The closeness wasn't sudden, it was gradual, layered, and subtle enough to ignore. Trust made me generous with explanations. I never questioned why my presence suddenly felt unnecessary in my own space. By the time doubt surfaced, it had already been trained to stay quiet. The truth didn't arrive gently. It came without warning, in a moment I hadn't prepared for. I walked into my own bedroom expecting normalcy and found betrayal instead. There were no excuses ready, no explanations waiting. Silence filled the space where loyalty should have been. Seeing them together felt unreal, like stepping into someone else's nightmare. My mind struggled to process what my eyes already knew. In that instant, trust shattered completely. The people I relied on most stood frozen, exposed by the truth they hadn't bothered to hide anymore. Nothing they could say mattered. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was emotional, deliberate, and deeply personal. That moment ended my marriage and my friendship at the same time. After that moment, everything inside me collapsed at once. Shock replaced anger, then grief replaced shock. I couldn't cry immediately. My body felt disconnected from my thoughts, as if protecting me from the full impact. I left without shouting, without breaking anything, without closure. Once alone, the weight settled in. Years of trust replayed in painful detail. Every memory felt contaminated. I questioned my judgment, my worth, my past decisions. Sleep disappeared. Food lost its taste. The world continued as if nothing had happened, while my reality crumbled quietly. Emotional collapse doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's silent, isolating, and deeply internal. That silence was the loneliest place I had ever been. The divorce moved faster than I expected. Papers were filed, meetings scheduled, decisions made before I fully understood what was happening. Legal language replaced conversation. Promises turned into demands. I trusted the process too much, assuming fairness was automatic. I didn't realize how unprepared I was. Every meeting drained me emotionally. I signed documents while still in shock, believing clarity would come later. It didn't. The speed of it all left no room for recovery. I wasn't fighting, I was surviving. Divorce wasn't just an ending, it was a dismantling. Piece by piece, the life I recognized was being taken apart, and I was too exhausted to stop it. Only later did I understand how carefully everything had been arranged against me. Accounts were emptied through technicalities. Assets were reassigned through paperwork I didn't fully grasp. Trust had made me careless with protection. What looked like a routine legal procedure turned out to be manipulation. They had planned ahead while I was still grieving. Discovering this felt like a second betrayal, colder and more calculated than the first. I realized fairness had never been their goal. They didn't just want freedom, they wanted control. The system rewarded preparation, not honesty. By the time I understood the damage, reversing it was nearly impossible. The betrayal had moved from personal to financial, and it cut even deeper. When everything settled, there was nothing left. No house, no savings, no shared security. I stood in the remains of a life that had been legally erased. Financial loss brings a specific kind of fear, the kind that doesn't fade with reassurance. I had to calculate survival instead of healing. Starting over wasn't inspirational, it was terrifying. The betrayal had stripped me of stability, independence, and certainty all at once. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was broke. The realization forced a hard truth. I could no longer rely on the past to protect me. Whatever came next would require rebuilding from absolute zero. And at that moment, I had no idea where to begin. The eviction notice came quietly, slipped under the door like an afterthought. She stared at it for a long time, reading the words again and again as if repetition might change their meaning. There was no anger left, only exhaustion. Packing felt unreal, like she was dismantling someone else's life. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Friends stopped calling. Loss has a way of making people uncomfortable, and discomfort creates distance. When she finally locked the door behind her, the silence was overwhelming. There was no destination, no plan, just an ending. Isolation settled in quickly, heavier than fear. Being betrayed had hurt, but being erased from familiar spaces cut deeper. She wasn't just losing a home. She was losing proof that her old life had ever existed. She reached out to the people she believed would stand by her. Conversations were brief, awkward, and unfinished. Some offered sympathy but no help. Others suggested she move on, as if recovery were a switch she could flip. Financial strain made everyone cautious. Emotional fatigue made them distant. Support faded quietly, not through rejection but avoidance. She realized how conditional stability could be. When she had something to offer, people stayed close. Now that she needed help, space appeared. That realization hurt more than she expected. Independence had once been her strength. Now it felt like abandonment. Being cut off wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, gradual, and undeniable. She learned quickly that survival would be solitary. Whatever came next, she would face it alone. With nowhere else to go, she drove back to the town she had left years ago. The road felt longer than she remembered, each mile pulling her further from the life she had lost. Familiar landmarks appeared slowly, old signs, quiet streets, places frozen in time. Returning wasn't comforting. It felt like a retreat. She hadn't planned to come back this way, empty-handed and defeated. The town held memories she wasn't ready to face, but it also held anonymity. No one here expected success from her anymore. That anonymity felt safer than pity. As she parked near the edge of town, she sat in the car longer than necessary, gathering herself. Going back wasn't about nostalgia. It was about survival when every other option had disappeared. The family home stood exactly where she remembered it, weathered and silent. Paint peeled from the siding. Windows were dark, coated with years of dust. No one had lived there since her parents passed away. Opening the door felt intrusive, like stepping into a memory that didn't belong to her anymore. The air inside was stale, heavy with neglect. Floors creaked under her weight, as if protesting her return. This place had once meant safety. Now it felt like a reminder of how much time had passed. She set her bag down slowly, unsure whether she was staying or just passing through. The house wasn't welcoming, but it was a shelter. And at that moment, shelter was all she needed. Every room carried echoes of the past. Childhood laughter, arguments long resolved, promises made without understanding their weight. Walking through the house stirred emotions she hadn't prepared for. She remembered who she had been before marriage, before betrayal, before compromise reshaped her. Those memories weren't comforting. They were confronting each other. They forced her to acknowledge how far she had drifted from herself. Sitting on the floor of her old bedroom, she felt grief layered on top of grief. But beneath it all was something else, recognition. This was where resilience had first formed, even if she hadn't known it then. The house didn't just hold pain. It held proof that she had survived before. And that realization mattered more than she expected. She cleaned one room enough to sleep, pushing aside broken furniture and dust-covered boxes. The house wasn't livable yet, but it could protect her from the night. As darkness fell, the silence pressed in harder. She lay awake, listening to unfamiliar sounds, questioning every decision that had led her here. Shelter, she realized, wasn't just walls. It was temporary safety while figuring out what came next. Pride had no place here. Survival did. She made a mental list of repairs she couldn't afford and problems she couldn't solve yet. Still, having a roof mattered. It gave her time. And time, she understood, was the most valuable thing she had left. While cleaning the floorboards near the back room, something hollow sounded beneath her step. She paused, then knelt down, prying loose a warped plank. Beneath it was a small compartment she had never known existed. Inside sat an old suitcase, dusty but intact, with her name written across the top in faded ink. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were stacks of cash, neatly bound, a plain ticket, and a folded note. Her breath caught as she read the words. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had planned this moment. In the quiet of that abandoned house, surrounded by loss, something shifted. For the first time since everything collapsed, the future didn't feel closed. It felt unknown, and that felt like possibility. She sat on the floor, the suitcase resting between her knees as if it might disappear if she looked away. The latch resisted at first, rusted from years of neglect. When it finally gave way, the sound echoed too loudly in the empty house. She hesitated before lifting the lid, bracing herself for disappointment. Expectations had taught her caution. Inside, everything was arranged deliberately, not like something forgotten. The careful order unsettled her more than chaos would have. This wasn't random storage. It was an intention preserved. She realized someone had wanted this found, and at the right time. Opening the suitcase wasn't just uncovering an object. It was opening a moment that had been waiting patiently, untouched for years. Stacks of cash filled the suitcase, neatly bound and separated with care. She counted slowly, hands unsteady, afraid the numbers would change if she rushed. $70,000. The amount felt unreal, especially after months of calculating survival down to the smallest expense. Her first reaction wasn't joy, it was disbelief. Money like this didn't appear without reason. She scanned the room instinctively, as if someone might step out and explain. No one did. The cash represented more than relief, it represented foresight. Someone had anticipated a future where she would need exactly this kind of escape. The weight of it settled in her chest. This wasn't luck. It was a preparation meeting collapse at precisely the same moment. Beneath the cash lay a sealed envelope containing a plain ticket, not a suggestion, an instruction. The destination wasn't random. It was specific, intentional, and far from anything she had planned. The date was open-ended, allowing choice without pressure. She traced the printed letters with her finger, trying to remember when she had last imagined leaving anywhere on purpose. Travel had once meant vacations or obligations. This felt different. This felt like permission. The ticket reframed the money instantly. It wasn't meant to fix the past. It was meant to move her forward. The realization made her breathe deeper than she had in weeks. This wasn't a rescue. It was a direction quietly offered. The note was folded carefully, the paper thick and familiar. The handwriting stopped her cold, steady, deliberate, unmistakably personal. The message was brief but precise. The money, it said, was only for travel, not comfort, not settling in, just movement. The real inheritance waited elsewhere, tied to a place and a decision she had to make herself. There was no explanation of how or why. No sentimentality, just trust that she would understand when the time came. The restraint of the words carried more weight than reassurance ever could. Whoever wrote it believed she was capable of choosing her next life. That belief stirred something she thought betrayal had erased. As she reread the note, memories surfaced, small moments she had dismissed years ago. A relative who watched quietly. A family friend who asked questions no one else did. Conversation that ended with a promise she hadn't taken seriously at the time. The benefactor hadn't needed recognition. They needed timing. Understanding arrived not as a revelation but as alignment. The past rearranged itself into sense. This gift wasn't sudden generosity. It was a contingency plan made by someone who saw the cracks long before they broke. Realizing that someone had believed in her future when she couldn't was overwhelming. Support, she learned, doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it waits. The note hinted at something larger, documents, property, or opportunities tied to a place she had never considered returning to. It spoke of foundations laid quietly and safeguards meant to activate only if everything else failed. Inheritance, she realized, wasn't just money, it was accessible. Knowledge, options. The secrecy made sense now. Had she known earlier, she might have stayed comfortable instead of growing. Hidden inheritance wasn't meant to cushion her fall, it was meant to redirect her life entirely. The thought was daunting. It meant leaving behind the familiar wreckage instead of rebuilding it. Possibility expanded beyond repair and recovery. Something new waited, and it required courage to approach. By morning, the decision settled without drama. She packed only what mattered, leaving behind objects tied to a life that no longer fit. The suitcase was closed again, heavier now with meaning instead of doubt. Leaving wasn't an escape, it was a response. Staying would mean circling loss. Going meant honoring intention. She locked the door of the childhood home gently, not as goodbye, but as acknowledgement. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was chosen. For the first time since betrayal stripped her world bare, she wasn't reacting. She was deciding. And that difference changed everything. Traveling alone felt unnatural at first. Airports had always been shared spaces, tied to someone else's plans or expectations. Now every step belonged to her alone. She moved through terminals quietly, observing instead of rushing. There was fear in the unfamiliar, but also relief. No one questioned her choices or asked her to compromise. Each mile placed physical distance between her and the life that had collapsed. The solitude forced her to sit with herself without distraction. It was uncomfortable, but honest. Traveling alone wasn't about escape, it was about reclaiming direction. For the first time in years, movement wasn't dictated by obligation or recovery, it was intentional. And that intention made every unfamiliar place feel like a beginning instead of a loss. The new environment felt sharp and alive, nothing like the quiet ruins she had left behind. Streets moved faster. Conversations carried confidence. No one knew her history, and that anonymity felt liberating. She wasn't someone's ex-wife or victim here, she was simply present. The change challenged her senses, new routines, unfamiliar customs, different expectations. At first, she felt unsteady, like she was learning how to exist again. But the unfamiliar also stripped away old roles. There was no script to follow, no reputation to maintain. She could observe before engaging, choose before committing. The environment demanded awareness instead of memory. And in that demand, she felt something awaken: curiosity without fear, possibility without permission. Independence didn't arrive all at once. It emerged through small decisions: where to live, what to eat, how to spend each day. She handled paperwork alone, asked questions without embarrassment, and made mistakes without apology. Each task reminded her that survival didn't require approval, it required attention. Learning independence meant trusting her own judgment again, even when uncertainty lingered. She discovered how capable she was when no one undermined her confidence. The fear of failure faded as competence replaced doubt. Independence wasn't glamorous. It was practical, grounding, and earned daily. And with each responsibility she managed successfully, the voice of insecurity grew quieter. She wasn't rebuilding what was lost. She was building something entirely her own. Confidence returned slowly, without announcements. It showed up in posture, in tone, in the way she answered questions without hesitation. She stopped apologizing for taking space. Confidence grew as she recognized patterns, skills she still possessed, instincts that hadn't failed her. The betrayal hadn't erased her ability, it had only interrupted it. Each success reinforced that truth. She began trusting her decisions again, even when outcomes weren't perfect. Confidence didn't mean certainty. It meant resilience. She learned she didn't need to be unbroken to be strong. Confidence came from surviving uncertainty repeatedly and realizing it didn't destroy her. That realization reshaped how she saw herself, not as someone recovering, but as someone evolving. Connections formed naturally, without effort or performance. She met people who valued her perspective rather than her past. Conversations weren't transactional. They were curious, mutual, respectful. These new allies didn't know what she had lost, and they didn't need to. They recognized who she was becoming. Support came in unexpected forms: shared advice, open doors, quiet encouragement. No one tried to rescue her or define her. That balance mattered. Trust rebuilt itself not through grand gestures, but consistency. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel measured against expectations she hadn't agreed to. These alliances weren't replacements for what was gone. They were foundations for something honest and forward-facing. As she settled in, old skills resurfaced: organization, negotiation, creativity, leadership. They hadn't disappeared, they had been suppressed. In a new setting, they were useful again. She applied them cautiously at first, then with confidence. Each success reinforced her sense of capability. Skills once taken for granted now felt valuable. She realized how much of herself had been minimized in her previous life. Rediscovering these abilities wasn't nostalgic, it was empowering. It reminded her that identity isn't fixed by circumstance. It adapts when given space. Skills, once reclaimed, changed how she approached opportunities. She wasn't starting from nothing. She was starting with experience she had finally learned to trust again. Letting go didn't happen in a single moment. It happened quietly, as memories lost their power to wound. She stopped replaying conversations that would never be resolved. The need for validation faded. The old life no longer demanded explanation or defense. Releasing it felt like exhaling after holding breath too long. There was grief, but it no longer dictated direction. Closure didn't come from justice or apology, it came from distance and growth. She understood that carrying the past forward would only limit what could come next. Releasing it wasn't denial, it was a choice. And with that choice, space opened for a future no longer defined by betrayal, but by intention. If this turning point has you wondering where her journey leads next, stay with the story and subscribe, because what follows changes her life in ways she never expected. For the first time since everything collapsed, money stopped being a source of fear. She didn't chase luxury or try to prove anything. Instead, she planned carefully, investing only in what she understood. The funds she had discovered became a foundation, not a crutch. She paid debts, secured housing, and built a cushion that allowed her to breathe again. Financial independence didn't make her reckless, it made her thoughtful. Every decision felt deliberate. She no longer needed to ask permission or explain herself. Independence wasn't about wealth, it was about control. Knowing she could survive without relying on anyone else changed how she stood, spoke, and chose. Stability returned quietly, earned through restraint rather than impulse. She took steps to ensure what happened to her could never happen again. Legal protection came first: documents reviewed, assets secured, boundaries formalized. She learned the language that once intimidated her and asked questions she had been too trusting to ask before. This time, clarity mattered more than speed. Contracts were fair. Safeguards were built in. Nothing relied on verbal promises anymore. Protection wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Having legal structure gave her confidence to move forward without fear of being erased again. She didn't dwell on the past wrongdoing. She focused on prevention. Security isn't loud, but it's powerful. Knowing her future was protected allowed her to live without constantly looking over her shoulder. She didn't pursue revenge, but consequences arrived anyway. Truth has a way of catching up without assistance. Financial records were questioned. Reputations shifted. Stories no longer aligned. She watched from a distance, uninvolved and unaffected. What mattered was not their downfall, but her detachment. Their chaos no longer reached her life. Consequences weren't delivered by her hand, but they came through systems, patterns, and exposure. That distance mattered. She realized she didn't need to confront them to move on. Watching accountability unfold without her participation confirmed something important. Peace doesn't require retaliation. It requires separation. Their actions finally belonged to them alone, and she was free of carrying their weight. Without the labels that once defined her, she began rebuilding her identity from the ground up. Not as someone's wife, not as someone betrayed, just like herself. She explored interests she had postponed, made choices without justification, and allowed her personality to evolve naturally. Identity wasn't reclaimed, it was redesigned. She no longer shaped herself around expectations that had limited her before. This version of herself wasn't louder or harder, it was clearer. Rebuilding identity meant accepting change without guilt. She wasn't returning to who she used to be. She was becoming someone new, shaped by experience but not imprisoned by it. That distinction gave her confidence rooted in authenticity, not survival. Peace arrived quietly without ceremony. There were no final confrontations or dramatic closures. She simply stopped caring. That indifference wasn't bitterness, it was healing. The urge to prove, punish, or explain faded completely. Peace came from living well, not from watching others suffer. She learned that revenge keeps you tied to what hurt you. Letting go cuts the cord entirely. Her days were filled with routines that felt balanced and intentional. Sleep returned. Laughter came easily again. Peace didn't erase memory, but it removed its power. She didn't forgive for their sake. She released it on her own. That release was the most powerful decision she made. The future no longer felt like something she had to rebuild from ruins. It felt open. She planned ahead without fear, setting goals based on desire rather than recovery. Opportunities were evaluated calmly, not desperately. She trusted her judgment again. Reclaiming the future meant allowing hope back in without conditions. She no longer measured time by what she had lost, but by what she was creating. The future wasn't perfect or guaranteed, but it was hers. That ownership mattered. Each step forward reinforced her autonomy. She wasn't escaping the past anymore. She was moving beyond it, guided by clarity instead of pain. Her life didn't restart with noise or celebration. It restarted with consistency. Mornings felt steady. Decisions felt intentional. She lived by rules she set herself: honesty, balance, independence. There was no need to announce her transformation. It showed in how she lived. Starting over didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing differently. She had learned that endings don't always close chapters. They open new ones quietly. This new life wasn't a reward. It was the result of endurance, of clarity, of choosing herself when no one else did. And that choice ensured that whatever came next would never be built on silence or sacrifice again.